Today we're going to do something a bit different, and instead of putting out a one-on-one comparison as we usually do, we thought we'd shake things up a bit and just grab a big fat handful of 5 full-sized high-end reversible seat models that we know people are curious to measure up against each other, and let them all duke it out in a common playground. As a result, we're only going to deal with the key points concerning each of these strollers today, focusing in particular on how the differences between them relate to fulfilling the specific needs and conditions of different lifestyles and environments. But that being said, note that we do also have standalone reviews for all these models on our channel that go into a lot more detail. So let's get started then, beginning with the Boogaboo Fox 2. The Fox 2 is Boogaboo's flagship model at the current moment, and despite swapping out which animal they're most excited to call their favorite every kindergarten class, it's really just the latest version of one of the longest design evolutions to ever exist in the stroller industry. And within this development line, while the Fox is not the best model they've made so far in my opinion, it's certainly not the worst either. On the positive side, the Fox 2 has excellent driving characteristics, being able to handle both rougher conditions like cobblestones or gravel on a regular basis, while also being able to tackle harder off-road terrain like forest trails when you really need to, and also being quite light to maneuver on smoother terrain as well, thanks in particular to raised ridges on the model's wheels and a clever overall angle of the chassis which maximizes control of the Fox 2's wide footprint. In addition, the Fox 2 also offers a couple of folding options relatively uncommon on the current market, in its ability to fold down into a single standing piece with both the seat reversed as well as with the bassinet. On the negative side, it's worth noting that the Fox 2's one-piece package is somewhat less compact than the other models that we'll be looking at in this video, and that the folding process itself is also a bit complicated and fiddly, and for these reasons, it's generally not my first choice if you're going to need to carry it regularly, such as if you live in a third-floor apartment without an elevator. In addition, the choice of extra lightweight materials and the fragile internal microcomplexity of the Fox 2's central folding mechanism have a strong negative impact on the stroller's longevity, especially if you don't treat your stroller very carefully. And in general then, this makes getting the model a bit of a trade-off. You get good terrain capability and a wide number of functions at a light weight, but for most people, there will be little chance that the model will last much longer than for a single child. Next up is the Joules Day Plus, and despite having a relatively similar overall look to the Fox 2 and sharing a few features such as using the same frame for both the seat and the bassinet, in terms of how it's built, the Day Plus is really just about as far as you can get from the Fox in relation to design focus. Positively, what you get with the Day Plus then is a stroller that is really built to last, designed with an abundance of metal as opposed to plastic, and also with a serious streamlining of functions and mechanical complexity, leaving only, other than admittedly those fancy lights, those functions that you actually need. In contrast to the Fox 2 then, there are less bells and whistles on the Day Plus. There's no fancy two-wheel mode, you can't fold the model into one piece with the seat reversed or with the bassinet attached, and the stroller doesn't even lock down when folded. But note that in not having these things, not only are there fewer mechanisms to potentially malfunction, but Joules has instead applied even more resources towards making what is there as simple and sturdy as possible. On the negative side, the trade-off is that the Day Plus is a tad heavy, not so much just for its size in my opinion. I honestly think that most people read way too much out of the weight in product descriptions, but rather in relation to its terrain capability. And while the model can handle easier cobblestones, gravel, and smoother park terrain just fine, it's apt to get a bit jittery over anything much rougher than this. In relation to all the other strollers in this video then, the Day Plus is arguably the sturdiest and the simplest, but it's also the heaviest in comparison to what it offers driving-wise. Moving on, the next model we're going to look at is the Nuona Mix Next, and despite its high price and wide popularity, this is one that I find to be a real mixed bag. On the positive side, despite having smaller front wheels than the Fox 2, the Mix Next larger suspension actually gives the model somewhat better driving characteristics over really rough and bumpy terrain, though conversely, the loose and malleable nature of the chassis higher up makes it less pleasant to steer overall. In addition, the model can be folded into one piece with the seat either forwards or reversed and folds down in such a manner as to be more cubic than long, giving it a little bit of an edge for people with narrower trunk space. On the negative side, however, the Mix Next has what I take to be a pretty serious Achilles heel, in the form of a pair of structurally weak flexing struts, which create a feeling of looseness when driving, and which are also likely to accelerate wear over time to other areas of the model. And in addition to this, despite the fact that the Mix Next is the only model we're covering today with a true lie-flat seat, which some people find quite useful, there are unfortunately several problems with the seat unit overall, including that it is a bit too narrow, it has a weak canopy, prone to fall back when driving, and worst of all, has a very weak leg rest and no footrest in the reverse position, making the model's leg support insufficient for the full age span with which one would use a stroller. As I also stated in our standalone review, my overall verdict for the Mix Next is that the price is a bit too high to account for these negatives. But that being said, I do hear all the time that people find this model discounted pretty significantly, and there is definitely a point at which the model would make for a good purchase as long as you're comparing it in a lower price class. Pushing forwards, let's have a look at the UPPAbaby Cruise V2, which, as a complete overhaul of the original version, is now nearly identical in structure to the Vista, albeit in slightly smaller proportions. UPPAbaby is really strong for reversible seat strollers at the moment, and when it comes to the Cruise V2 then, I actually have very little negative to say about the model. Despite being on the smaller side, the Cruise V2 is quite sturdy, not as simple in all its mechanisms as the Day Plus, but still pretty impeccable as far as how the larger structure is put together. And it also has one of the larger seats and shopping baskets among the models we're presenting today, while at the same time being very easy to fold and being the most compact when folded down as a single piece. Driving-wise, again, like the Day Plus, the Cruise V2 is primarily designed for urban and light suburban terrain, though note that it manages this with less overall weight. And on the whole then, the only real negatives in my mind are that the brake system and swivel locks are a bit more complex internally than I'd like them to be, which can lead to problems if you don't lubricate these mechanisms occasionally. But their disassemblable nature in the face of eventual problems means that they are not concerns that I think ought to dissuade someone from purchasing the model. Last up then is the Cruise V2's big brother, the Vista V2, which has all the same essential attributes but just expanded to a larger size. And for me, this is actually a good thing, most importantly for the added terrain capability which allows the model to traverse anywhere the Fox 2 can, but with the added advantage of a much stronger and simpler chassis that can tolerate a lot more abuse without as much risk of breaking or wearing down too quickly. In addition, the model has a simple fold and that great combination of a high-positioned seat and a spacious shopping basket, making it ideal for longer trips out when you need to carry a lot of stuff. As far as the disadvantages of the model go, the Vista V2 does share the same complexity concerns in the brake system and the swivel locks that I expressed about the Cruise, and it's also a tad on the large side. Not as much as a lot of people think, so I would recommend not dismissing the model before actually comparing the numbers, but still large enough to make it probably not the ideal model if you need something to sling in and out of a car many times a day, especially if you live in a smoother environment without much need for good terrain capability. In any case, we hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, we ask that you subscribe, as it helps us to continue making videos in the future. If you'd like to know more about any of these models, we have standalone reviews for each of them, and links have been added in the description. In addition, if you are currently shopping for a stroller, we have a buyer's guide on our Patreon page which lists a wide range of models that we recommend, with a lot of technical and lifestyle related information. You can find that by following the link in the description as well. Thank you.